Yeah, the old essay should be on the bottom, new essay should be on top. All right, folks, where did I leave off with you guys? Shays' Rebellion. Had we already finished discussing it, or were we in the middle of it? Okay, so let us continue then. Okay, let's start off with the Annapolis Convention. So last time we met, folks, we were discussing how the Articles of Confederation was both a success and a failure. We talked about how that successful failed experiment served as a stepping stone. It got us through the critical period. It gave us time to politically mature. And things were okay. Were they great under the Articles? Not at all. And so we had the Annapolis Convention, and at the Annapolis Convention, delegates met to discuss making the Articles stronger. Unfortunately, they weren't able to do anything because how many states showed up? Only 5 when you need at least how many to do anything? 9 to pass laws, but if you want to change the Articles and make it stronger, you need how many? All 13. And so this proved to be pretty ineffective. But again, it showed that there weren't very many people that were super concerned about the Articles. And so what changed everyone's minds was the Shays' Rebellion of 1786, not 87. 1786. And in Shays' Rebellion, like we mentioned before, this was a rebellion led by Daniel Shay, and it was a rebellion of debt-ridden farmers. So why were these farmers rebelling?
They were losing their land.
They were losing their land. And why were they losing their land? Because they were in debt. And why were they in debt? Why didn't these farmers have any money?
They were poor.
They were poor, yeah, but why were they poor?
Fighting in the war.
They were fighting in the war, and now that the war is over, what did they expect?
To get paid.
To be paid. And so ultimately, the reason why they're in debt is that they had yet to be paid by the government. And so they weren't paid by the government. They couldn't pay for their farms, and so their farms were being taken away. And did the farmers think that that was fair?
No.
Then that's not fair. Why should my farm be taken away? I was paying my bills. It's the government that's not paying their bills to me. So they rebel, and they burn down the courthouse, and they burn down the tax collector's office, and they start rebelling all throughout Massachusetts, and this becomes a mobocracy. Did we talk about mobocracy last time?
No.
So a mobocracy is this idea that who is in charge? The mob. And is a mob a rational, clear-thinking group of individuals that will listen to reason? No, they're angry, they're upset, and they're going to destroy things, right? And are they controllable? No, they're just wild and crazy and chaotic. And so the idea is there was a fear that if this rebellion got out of hand, this would no longer be a government with democracy, with democracies and freedoms and whatever else. This government would be a mobocracy in which the mob ruled society, where it was up to, emotions and anger and frustration who determined what would happen. Well, how did Massachusetts hope to put this down? Giving them what they want, but if we give them what they want, won't other people just rebel and be like, oh, well, if Massachusetts will just give us everything that we need? So ultimately, the Articles of Confederation government failed to put this rebellion down. And why couldn't the Articles of Confederation government put down this rebellion? Because they lacked an army. So how does this make us look? Very weak. In fact, it took us over 3 weeks to put down Shays' Rebellion. 3 weeks, folks. That's a very long time for a rebellion of 300 farmers. And it took us 3 weeks to put them down because the Articles of Confederation had no army. Now, Massachusetts had a militia, but it was having a hard time putting down this rebellion. And Massachusetts did ask other states to send in their militias. But did South Carolina want to send its militia to Massachusetts?
No.
No, Massachusetts, defend yourself. Now, only when this rebellion began to threaten other states is that when other states began to send their militias. Sure, but until then, Massachusetts was on their own. So what does it suggest, again, about the Articles if it takes 3 weeks to put down a rebellion of 300 farmers? Very weak. Folks, if our school decided to rebel today and start like burning stuff down, how quickly do you think it would take the U.S. government to put down that rebellion of 1,600 people?
An hour.
Hours, right? Tops maybe a day and a half just to get the military here. But would it take a week?
Nope.
No way. They would crush us in an instant because the U.S. government is perceived to be strong. But the Articles of Confederation was not. And now, are we concerned?
Yes.
Might this happen again?
Yes.
And did we struggle last time? Sure. So we said, I don't know if we can let this happen again. We might actually have to change the government. So the significance of Shays' Rebellion is this. Shays' Rebellion convinced the Americans that they needed a stronger government. It convinced Americans that we needed a stronger government. That's really what you should take from Shays' Rebellion. This debt-ridden farmer rebellion made us realize that we needed a stronger government. That's what Shays' Rebellion did for us. It made us realize that we needed a stronger government. And so we said, all right, well, let's meet then. Let's meet and discuss. And they decided to meet at the Philadelphia Convention, which will eventually be known as the Constitutional Convention. So they meet again in 1787 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And if you come with me to the East Coast, you'll be able to visit this building. We'll be able to go inside. It's quite interesting. So they met in Philadelphia in 1787, and they met. Their primary purpose when meeting was to revise the Articles. The reason why they were meeting was to revise or fix the Articles. Were they meeting to make a new constitution? No, they were not. So again, they were meeting to make a stronger government, or rather to revise the Articles to make it better, but were they considering making a new government yet?
No.
No, they were not. And so what happened was that as they went through the Articles of Confederation, looking to see what they could make stronger, what did they realize about the Articles of Confederation? It's a horribly weak document, and would it take forever to make this government strong? And every time we had to make an amendment, what would we need? We need all 13 states to agree. So they said, maybe this is not worth it. Perhaps instead of making a stronger Articles of Confederation, it was proposed that they should just create a brand new government. And so the Philadelphia Convention became the Constitutional Convention, where they secretly decided to create a new government, or they secretly decided to make a new constitution. And why do you think it had to be in secret?
Because they weren't supposed to be.
Because they weren't supposed to be making a constitution. People thought that they were just revising. And if people found out that they were making a new constitution, might many be upset about that? They said, that is not what we asked you to do. You're supposed to be making a stronger Articles, not taking away the rights of the state. You can't do that. And so they wanted to keep it in secret. They had no newspapers there. They made sure that no one took any real notes because they wanted to keep it all a secret. In any case, folks, the person who does keep notes secretly and is known as the father of the Constitution is James Madison. So James Madison is probably one of the most important characters at the Constitutional Convention. And in fact, we refer to him as the father of the U.S. Constitution. And the reason why we call him that is that he was the only one that was actually prepared for this new government. Everyone else thought we were going to do what? Fix the old government. But he came with books, he came with research, and he said, I've got some good ideas about a new government if anyone is interested. And because of this proposal, and because of the many ideas he introduced, he's known as the father of the U.S. Constitution because the heart of this Constitution is like 85% James Madison's ideas. So we have to credit him with creating this Constitution, or at least the vast majority of it is influenced by James Madison. He was a young guy, too. Anyway, of course, George Washington is appointed as president of this Constitutional Convention because he's going to oversee all of it. And why George Washington? He's a unifying figure. He's well respected. He's a military figure. He's charismatic. He's very forceful. He's taller than everyone. I mean, for all these reasons, they said, George Washington, would you be willing to step up to the plate again and be the president of the Constitutional Convention? He said, yeah, why not? I'll do that. So he served as president. And interestingly enough, folks, George Washington had this chair at the front of the convention. And on that chair, there was a symbol of a sun that looked like this. And Ben Franklin was sitting there. Ben Franklin, by this time, is the oldest delegate at 81 years old. So he's pretty old by this time, and he's still chilling. But Ben Franklin is there, and he looks at that, and he asks, someone asks him, President Franklin, do you think that that sun is setting or rising? And he said, I think we're going to have to wait and see. Because the idea was, at this convention, if we failed, then perhaps this sun symbolized the sun setting on America because we failed. But if we succeeded, then that sun would be rising on America, and it showed that we were successful. So he says, I don't know, but I'll let you know when we're done. And at the very end of the Congress, he speaks to his friend and he says, after all of this, I think I can positively say that that is a rising sun on America. And they're like, oh, it's cool. So that happened. Anyway, so of course they all meet, they discuss. Few people are not there, like Adams is in England, Thomas Jefferson is in France, a whole bunch of stuff. Anyway, and what you should note is that if you look at all the positions here, there were lawyers and farmers. These guys were business owners. This guy was a lawyer. These guys were lawyers and worked in government. This guy's worked in government. And only 8 farmers. The majority of people in the Constitutional Convention were what? What class? They were wealthy. The vast majority of those at the Constitutional Convention were of the rich, elite classes. There were 8 farmers there, but that might mean they were plantation farmers. So like they were still not poor. So the vast majority were actually very wealthy, which means, is this a government that's going to represent the interests of the common people?
No.
Probably not. Now, are they going to think about the common people? Sure. But they're not really going to have an explicit voice here. Anyway, there's a lot of debate over this Constitutional Convention because we're making a new government, and there's fears that we will never get anything done because people just can't seem to get along. Luckily, this Constitution is known as a series of compromises, so let's talk about the compromises of the Constitution. It's always argued that the U.S. Constitution was built on a series of compromises, that it wasn't just like all these guys agreed right from the very beginning. People debated left and right over what to include. And in order to move this government forward, did we have to compromise? All the time. And so you'll notice that the heart of this U.S. Constitution is, again, built on a series of compromises. So the first question that was asked, and really the main question that we had to get past before anything could get done was, how should the states be represented? So question number 1 that was asked at this convention, how should the states be represented? How should the states be represented? Again, how should the states be represented? How should the states be represented? So, 2 plans were introduced. The first plan was the Virginia Plan, also known as the Big State Plan. And the idea that Virginia proposed was that representation should be what? Based on population. So the more people you have, what? The more representatives or votes you'll get in Congress, right? So the more people you have in your state, the more votes you'll get. And so who liked this idea? The big states. They're like, oh, that's great. And is that fair though? Because I mean, if you're a big state, don't you need more representatives? So big states say that's fantastic, and I love that idea. Yes, we should go with the Virginia plan. Who didn't like this idea? Small states. Small states say, whoa, 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 that is not fair. Look, I was created as a small state, and there's nothing I can do about that. Are you telling me that I will have no real power because Virginia is going to boss us around? That's not okay. That's not fair. We're supposed to be 13 equal states, but you're telling us that our voices are not as important. So what we propose, also known as a small state plan, is that we should have what? What type of representation? Equal representation. And each state will have how many votes? 2 per state. So 2 per state. Who doesn't think that idea is fair? The big states say, no, 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 that is not okay. We have like 3 million people and you have like 500. How are we equal? That is not fair. Because let me give you an example, folks. Suppose at the school we said, all right, we're going to vote, and there's going to be teacher voters and student voters, okay? And the way it's going to work is every group, teachers and students, will get 1 vote for every 2 people. So there are about 1,200 students at this school, right? So we're going to go ahead and give you guys 600 representatives to vote in the next election. Make sense so far? Teachers, there are about 80 teachers here, so we're going to give you guys 1 vote per 2 teachers. You guys are going to get 40 votes. So you have 600, we have 40. Do you guys like the idea that you have more influence? Of course you do. You're a bigger group, but are teachers okay with that? They say, we're never going to win anything because there's clearly more students. That's not fair. So how about this? Equal. Students will get 2 votes, teachers will get 2 votes. That's equal. Do teachers like that? Now we're on the same playing field. But is that fair to students? No, because all of a sudden, for teachers, that's 1 person representing 40 people. But for the students, that's 1 person representing 600 people. So is that fair? Not at all. Either way, this was a huge problem, and if we didn't resolve this debate, we were going to walk away from the Constitutional Convention a failure. So we debated back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and we couldn't figure it out until one day a man introduced what became known as the Great Compromise. And with the Great Compromise, which plan did we choose? We chose both of them. And so today, the House of Representatives is based on which plan? Right, the Virginia plan, based on population. While the Senate is based on the New Jersey plan, based on equal representation. By the way, based on population is also known as proportional representation, so you should know that term also. Proportional representation. So today, folks, let's say California, Nevada, New York, and Montana. How many senators does each of those states get? 2, 2, 2, and 2, because it's equal representation in the Senate. What about in the House of Representatives? How many representatives do each of those states get? California, for example, gets 55. Nevada gets like 17. New York gets like 35, and Montana gets 1. Now, Montana's a big state, but does it have a big population? No, it does not. So there are states in which they have more senators than congressmen, just because you're required to have 2 senators, but the way the population works, you only get 1 representative. So, cool. But does this compromise allow us to move forward? Yes, so that's good. We figured this out. Great compromise. Hooray. Next question then at the Congress. should we count slaves as part of the population? Should slaves be counted in the population? That's the next question. Should slaves be counted when deciding the population or when counting the population? Should slaves be counted in the population? Now, who did want to count the slaves? The South. And why might the South want to count the slaves? It's a bigger population that they'll have, and they'll give them more power. Who doesn't want to count the slaves? The North. They say, why would you count the slaves? They don't even get to vote in your state. That's not fair. They're not even people to you, so you can't count them. So they both debated, and again, if they didn't get this resolved, was the North and the South going to split? Huge issue. But they ultimately compromised, and they said, fine, we will count slaves, but they'll only count as 3/5 of a person. Thus bringing us to the 3/5 compromise, where it says in our Constitution that these people count as 3/5 of a person. But they said this will count towards population, but to make the North feel better also, it would also count towards taxes. So the amount of taxes the South would pay would be higher if they had a higher population. So for example, like California has the biggest population in the US, right? So do we pay more taxes than Montana? We do, because we're a bigger state, so. Anyway, 3/5 compromise. They count as 3/5 of a person. Good there? The other compromise then is known as the slave trade compromise. In the slave trade compromise, it said that we would not ban the slave trade for 20 years. That we would not ban the slave trade for 20 years because the South continued to want to have slaves in America. But they said we would not ban the slave trade for 20 years. Now, after 20 years, could we ban the slave trade? Yes, we could start talking about it. But they said for at least 20 years, we would not ban the slave trade. And that made the southern states happy so they can get as many slaves as possible in the next 20 years. Let me make clear, though, this is not banning slavery. This is just banning the slave trade of slaves coming into America. Does that make sense? So we're still going to have slavery in America. We're just not going to get it from Africa after 20 years. Cool? And by the way, we do end the importation of slaves by 1807, so we did stick to this, and then we did ban it right after when we could. So that's slave trade compromise. The next question then is, how should we elect the president? Or how to elect the president? How to elect the president? The solution was something called the Electoral College. And the Electoral College is the group that actually elects the president. Now, I bet you thought that you elected the president, but that's not how it works. Why might the founding fathers of the Constitution way back when not want the people to directly elect the president? Come on. We had too many people, sure. So time might be a factor, but it's not an issue of too many people. It's not an issue of numbers. Why might the founding fathers not want you guys to directly elect the president?
We won't decide on one president.
Huh?
We won't really decide on one president.
You mean we won't decide on one president? So maybe we'll be divided. So maybe there's an issue of division and we won't look united. Definitely a problem. Describe these early Americans, guys. Are they educated?
No.
Are they unruly? Are they prone to mobocracy and demagogues? Yeah, and that's really what it comes down to, folks, is that we did not trust the common people because they were uneducated. And we feared that they might elect the wrong person. And might it be really easy to get uneducated people to elect the wrong person? Sure. Think about it, folks. If teenagers could vote, like 13-year-olds, they'd probably elect like Justin Bieber and One Direction to be the president of the United States, not realizing that only one of them could be president. Okay? That's likely what would happen because if you're uneducated, you don't really know how the process works. So we feared the common people, and we said that they may just not know well enough. And so the idea is that in order to prevent that, we created a buffer almost. A buffer to the presidency, and that was the Electoral College. And the idea is that electors would vote in the interest of the people. The electors would vote in the interest of the people. And it's more like when you have the popular vote, it was like a recommendation to the electors. But do the electors have to listen to the people? No. Today they do, depending on what state you live in. But before, they didn't have to. That'd be like if we were deciding the school lunch and I asked you guys, so what do you guys want for school lunch? Like, oh, we want KFC and McDonald's and we want like, I don't know, like Carl's Jr. And I said, okay, that's great. And I hear you. I don't think that's what's best. So I'm going to tell them salad. Well, I know you guys voted. That's the popular vote. But I'm your elector, and I don't think you guys know what you're doing. So I hear you. I thank you for your opinions. I'm going to go ahead and vote for salad. You'll thank me 30 years from now. But the idea was that's what was happening. We appreciated that you guys participated in democracy. And usually, would the electors vote the same way that the people did? But there might be situations in which the people really wanted to vote for, I don't know, One Direction. And the elector said, no, that's going to be terrible for America. We're going to have to change our vote. We're going to vote for someone else. So that's how that worked. And the phrasing that they liked to use, folks, was that they said that they needed to safeguard against the excesses of democracy. They said they had to safeguard against the excesses of democracy. Pretty much what they meant was that, can there be too much democracy? Yeah, like, maybe we all shouldn't have democracy when deciding how short I need to sharpen my pencil. Like, I understand that everyone should have a voice here, but do I really need to ask what size shirt I should be wearing? Or do I really need to ask what's the temperature of the water I should be drinking? Like, no. I'll decide on the behalf of the class. I will be the elector because sometimes there's just too much. Like, if we had to set the thermostat in this room, right? Like, what temperature should it be? Would there be a variety of opinions in this room? Yeah, sure. So maybe that's too much democracy. And maybe like, oh, I'm cold, I'm hot. Well, I'll decide for us. Okay, I will decide on our behalf because that'll be easier, and I'm going to choose really cold is what I'm going to choose. The last question we should ask: how long should Supreme Court justices serve? How long should Supreme Court justices serve? And what's the answer, folks? How long do Supreme Court justices get to serve? Anyone have a guess?
For like 3 years.
I hear 3 years. I hear for life. Until they die. It's for life. Okay, they serve for life. But they don't have to die in office. Like, you die here. Okay, you're going to sit in that chair until you're dead. No, they can retire. They're allowed to retire from office because that'd be horrible. Like, you get appointed to your coffin. It's like, okay, so you do this and you don't leave until you're dead. You got it? Until you're dead. No, that's not what happens. They can retire when they feel that they're no longer to exercise the capacity that they've been given. So, for example, Ginsburg will retire very soon and she will be replaced. But the idea is that these justices served for life because they wanted to make sure that they were not affected by politics or popular trends. They wanted to protect them from politics and popular trends. Because think about it, folks. Is what's popular always what's best for the country? No. But if Obama, the president currently, wants to do something, is he kind of tied to what the people want versus what's best? And the same is true for Congress, right? Because do these people have to worry about getting reelected? They do. And so let's say, oh, we have to do this. But if I do that, the people won't like it, and then I won't get elected again. So am I going to do what's best, or am I going to do what's popular? I'm going to do what's popular. But for Supreme Court justices, they don't have to worry about re-election. Once they're appointed and confirmed by the Senate, they're there for life. So do they have to worry about what's popular? They just have to worry about what's best in the eyes of the Constitution. Does that make sense, folks? So the idea was we wanted to insulate them from the people. We wanted to make sure they were separate from popular trends and politics. Good there? All right. So we all like, yay, we like this. This is great. And we all agreed. And eventually what we realized is that we fixed a lot of problems. You don't have to write this down. But just take note, folks. In the articles, there was no president. So how did we fix that? We made a president. There was no Supreme Court. How did we fix it? Supreme Court. There was no single currency. What do you think we can do now? Have one currency. We had no army before. What do you think we have now? An army, a commander-in-chief. We couldn't regulate trade before. What do you think we can do now? We can regulate trade. We couldn't tax before. What do you think we can do now? We can tax. And it was difficult to pass laws before. Is it difficult now? Yes, but is it easier? Before it was like 70%, now it's 50% plus 1. And before it was difficult to amend because you needed how many? 13. Now you need only 75% of states and two-thirds of both houses. But that's still easier because is that all? No, that's still easier in the long term. So did we fix the problems of the Articles of Confederation? Most definitely. And did it help that we had this terrible government first? Because then we knew, oh yeah, we need a president, guys. Because remember when we didn't have one, it sucked. Oh, we also need an army. Because remember Shays Rebellion? Yeah, we can't have that again. We need an army. So this definitely helped as part of the experience. So now we have to ratify the Constitution, which brings us to the ratification debate. What does ratification mean? Not to change, that's amend. We have to ratify it. So we have to approve or to pass. Very good. So to ratify means to approve or to pass. So we have the ratification debate. Because now we're going to let the American people know, hey, remember when we weren't talking to you guys for like 2 years? Yeah, here's what we came up with. Surprise. We came up with the Constitution. And are some people going to be in favor of this? Yeah, they like the idea of a new Constitution. Are others going to be opposed to this? Almost definitely. Like, what? This seems stronger than the government that we previously created, and are people afraid of that? There are still some afraid of a strong government. So a debate ensues between those for and those against the Constitution. And what are those two groups known as? Federalists. The Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. So first, let's talk about the Federalists. Now, the Federalists were made up of, again, the elite, typically the rich. But the names you should be familiar with are Hamilton. You'll know this guy's name very well next unit. Madison, you'll also know him very well next unit. And John Jay, you'll know him a little bit. It's John Jay. So Hamilton, Madison, and Jay, these were the main Federalists. But as you guys previously stated, you also have G-Dub and Franklin. G-Dub, for those of you that don't know, is George Washington. Now, These men were for or against the Constitution? For the Constitution. They liked this idea of a stronger government, because would a strong government protect against problems, perhaps? Rebellions, sure. Now, in order to get people to support the Constitution as well, they wrote a series of essays called the Federalist Papers. So they wrote the Federalist Papers, which were essays to convince people to support the Constitution. So one thing that the Federalists did again was they wrote the Federalist Papers, which were essays to support the Constitution. So the Federalist Papers, written to support the U.S. Constitution. Good there. All right. On the opposite side were the Anti-Federalists. And these were typically the poor, the people that feared strong government. And what people might have been included among the Anti-Federalists that we know of? Definitely Samuel Adams. He feared this new government. Samuel Adams actually even refused to show up to the Constitutional Convention. He said, no, if you're going to make this government stronger, forget it. I'm not going. There's no way I'm going to be part of that. So there were many that opposed it. Again, they feared strong government, and they said that if there was a strong government, what might that government do that made them afraid? It might take away their rights. So they said, in order for me to support this new government, it's got to have what? A Bill of Rights, to guarantee in writing our rights. So the Anti-Federalists demanded a Bill of Rights. And they said, if you include a Bill of Rights, then we'll support it. So again, they demanded a Bill of Rights. Good. So let's look at the Bill of Rights real quick. Wait, first, let's ratify it first. So, the Constitution was ratified in June 21st, 1788. And they're like, yay, we did it. We ratified the Constitution. And thus, you see the emergence of America 2.0. Which is true. It's the new Constitution. America 2.0. Now, what is not included in the original Constitution yet? What haven't we included yet that we're going to write? The Bill of Rights. So remember, folks, this does not include the Bill of Rights yet. We're going to get to that. But we ratified it with the promise that there would be a Bill of Rights. Does that make sense to everyone? So we don't have it yet, but we're gonna. So, it's ratified. We have America 2.0. Now, let's talk about the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights was added later, and the Bill of Rights ends up being our first 10 amendments. For example, do you guys know what the First Amendment is?
Freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, all that stuff.
Sure. What about Second Amendment?
Oh, right to bear arms.
Sure.
We can defend ourselves.
So let's go over these, folks. Amendment number 1. First Amendment is the 5 freedoms: speech, press, religion, peaceable assembly, and the right to petition. So you have the freedom of speech, you have the freedom of press, you have the freedom of religion, you have the freedom of peaceable assembly. What does that mean? You have the right to meet and protest, and the right to petition means to what?
Sign the paper.
Yeah, but why do people sign those papers?
So that you'll know how many people support something that you believe in.
But that's not why. That's what happens. But the right to petition means to what? Does anyone know?
It's a peaceful kind of protesting. I don't know.
Right to petition means to try to change or protest against the government. You have the right to protest. Because peaceable assembly means you have the right to meet. Right to petition means you have the right to protest. So again, you have the freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion, and the right to petition. The 4 freedoms and the right to petition. Most people get this wrong, like, oh, the First Amendment's freedom of speech, Second Amendment's right to bear arms, Third Amendment is freedom of religion. No. All First Amendment. Good so far? Wonderful. Second Amendment. the right to bear arms. Why did we want to have the right to bear arms? So what was the importance here? What were we afraid of? Why did we want to keep our weapons? Jesus?
Isn't it in case the government got too strong?
Yeah, in case the government tried to take away our rights again. So for self-defense, really. The right to bear arms. Or it can also mean you had the right to the arms of a bear. It just depended on your interpretation. So rights to bear arms. This is, again, hotly debated today, whether or not this should still exist. Many people feel like this is something that should be repealed because this is something that is 200 years old and maybe no longer applies. But we'll debate about that later. Third Amendment, no quartering of soldiers. Why might we have this? Did something happen in the colonial era?
The Quartering Act.
The Quartering Act. So they feared quartering again, so they said, no more. You can't do it. Especially because we allowed this new government to have what? An army. Are we concerned that they might try to quarter them? So we said, okay, you can have an army, but no quartering. Fourth Amendment, protection from search and seizure. Protection from search and seizure. Which means, what can they no longer do? Search your stuff without a warrant. So what colonial experience made us weary of them searching our stuff without a warrant? Writs of assistance. Very good. So the writs of assistance was that thing that happened last time in the colonial era that made us weary of this happening again. The writs of assistance. Fifth Amendment. Right to a fair and legal trial. Let's put it that way. Right to a fair and legal trial. So, when did we not have fair trials? Not the Salem witch trial. That's way too early. The Vice Admiralty Courts, right? The Vice Admiralty Courts. So, we wanted to make sure that we had fair trials. Also, note that the Fifth Amendment says that you don't have to testify against yourself. So, let's say you committed a crime. If they put you on the stand, can they ask you, did you do it? Do you have to answer them? No, because you obviously don't want to go to jail. But did you do it? Yes. Ha, we got you. But you're going to say, I plead the Fifth, which means you don't have to answer the question because you don't want to incriminate yourself. Sixth Amendment, right to a lawyer. So you have the right to have someone defend you, especially because many people that get arrested might be what? Poor or uneducated, and do they know how the law works? No. So this is important to many of you. What do you guys think that kid did? Probably like a murderer. Seventh Amendment, you have the right to a trial by jury, again, because of the Vice Admiralty Courts, right? So the Seventh Amendment, you have the right to a jury. This guy's falling asleep. And that woman is clearly texting and using her phone. So is that guy. Like, you're not slick. Like, pay attention to the court case. They're probably judging this kid right here. That kid's a murderer anyway. Eighth Amendment. Protection from high fines and cruel punishments. So, for example, if you steal a loaf of bread, can they cut off your hand in this country? No, because that would be considered cruel and unusual. Do other countries still do that today? Yeah, some still do. You steal a loaf of bread, they'll cut off your hand. That still happens today. But can you do that in this country? Absolutely not. Also, they will protect you from high fines, which means, let's say you commit a crime, folks. Let's say you steal a loaf of bread. Can they fine you $1 million for that loaf of bread?
No.
No, they can't, because that's kind of ridiculous. That's a lot of money. But just so you know, to make it more applicable to you, here's why the Eighth Amendment matters to you. It does matter. You know how like people are getting arrested and like getting charged by the recording industry for downloading music illegally? I mean, how many of you guys have downloaded music illegally once or twice before? Don't lie. I know most of you have. What happened recently was that a student was arrested someone knocked on their door and they arrested them for downloading music illegally. This student had done it several times before and there was no problem, so he thought, what's the harm? And then one day the FBI and the RIAA show up and say, you're coming with us. We're going to charge you for downloading music. You downloaded 25 songs. We're going to charge you $1 million a song. That's the fine. So he said, that's ridiculous. That's a high fine. And he says, that is a violation of my amendment, my 8th Amendment rights. So this case went all the way to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court said, actually, yeah, you're right. That is a violation of your rights. That is way too high because that's a lot, right? $1 million per song. They said, in fact, that is too high. A more fair sentence would be $100,000 per song. So even though this kid doesn't have to pay $25 million, it is still ruled that $2.5 million is a fair sentence because that kid did steal and distribute and share that music illegally. So they deem that to still be a fair sentence. So, just so you know, it is very easy to know if you're downloading. It is not hard at all, and they can find you very easily. The people, you guys use Time Warner or whatever, they know exactly what you're doing because you told them that they could see what you're doing because you signed that contract and he said, by allowing you to provide data to my house, you also have access to my, the things that I do. So they know what you're doing. And if at any point the recording industry or motion picture industry decides we need to make an example out of someone, they might just choose you. And you don't know when or where, and it doesn't matter if you've done it before or not, they'll just choose you. And you can be that person. And it's like winning the lottery, but the opposite. Where instead of winning money, they'll actually cost you like hundreds of thousands of dollars. So feel free to continue downloading if you like, but just understand you are taking a risk. That you might be held responsible, and your decision to download one song might be the difference of you going to college or not. FYI. 9th Amendment. The 9th Amendment includes other rights not in the Constitution. So just because it's not in the Constitution, does that mean I don't get to do it or I don't have the right to it? Like, do I have the right to pick up rocks and examine them? Do I have that right?
Sure.
Sure. So is that in the Constitution, though? No. Do I have the right to eat bubble gum?
Yeah.
Sure. Do I have the right to swallow that bubble gum?
Yeah.
Sure, I can do all that stuff. But is it in the Constitution? No. So what they're saying is we have other rights not in the Constitution, provided that they're reasonable. Does that make sense? So you have the right to walk to your car, you have the right to sharpen your pencil, all these things, because would this be a very long Constitution if we had to list every single right that you had? Sure, so they said other rights not in the Constitution, we also have rights to them. We don't want to list everything, it would take too long. So we also have the right to an education, leisure, homes, work, whatever else. That's the 9th Amendment. The last amendment you need to know is the 10th Amendment, known as states' rights. And the idea behind the 10th Amendment is this. Any power not given to the federal government is reserved for the states. So that's how I want you guys to write that down. Any power not given to the federal government is reserved for the states. So any power not given to the federal government is reserved for the states. What that means is that the federal government is not given the power, let's say, to regulate education. Who has that power? The states do. If the federal government does not have power to regulate roads, who has that power? States. If the federal government does not have power to regulate, I don't know, Pokemon, who has that power? The states. Does that make sense, folks? This, in conjunction with another part of the Constitution we'll learn about next week, will be an ongoing debate that still goes on today. This is probably one of the most important things you need to know about our government, is states' rights. Because the next thing that we'll learn in a week or two is about the Elastic Clause. And the federal and state relationship is a debate that goes on every day, all the time. Every important thing that's ever happened in America has been about states' rights in the federal government. But yeah, a few more things. The Enlightenment. These guys influenced the Constitution as well, so let's talk about Enlightenment influences. So the Enlightenment influences. First off, J-Lo. What has J-Lo taught us, or what Enlightenment ideas has J-Lo introduced?
The natural rights.
Natural rights is definitely one, so John Locke introduced natural rights. And he also introduced something called the social contract. This was in the Declaration of Independence. But the idea is, what is the role of the government? What is the government supposed to do? Why did we create it? To protect our rights. What if the government stops protecting our rights? What is then our duty and responsibility? To overthrow and rebel. So, the social contract, to put easily, is the right to rebellion. That's the social contract. It's the right to rebellion. If the government does not protect our rights, we have the right to rebellion. So that's the social contract, the right to rebellion. The next Enlightenment philosopher is Voltaire. And Voltaire, he introduced the idea of the four freedoms: speech, press, assembly, religion. So he's the guy behind the four freedoms. He taught us that. Voltaire was the four freedoms. And lastly, Montesquieu. Checks and balances, correct. Checks and balances, separation of powers. He did checks and balances. What's the whole point of checks and balances, folks, where you divide your government into three sections? Why did we do that? Yeah, so one is not more powerful than the other, right? Can the president do anything without Congress or the Supreme Court? No. Can the Supreme Court do anything without the president or Congress? And Congress can do anything without them? No. So the idea is there's no one person who can become a tyrant. Does that make sense? That's the idea behind checks and balances. You should also just note very quickly that the colonial experience also influenced the U.S. Constitution. The colonial experience also influenced the U.S. Constitution. And what experiences am I talking about, folks? The oppressive acts, right? The oppressive acts. So the colonial experience also influenced the U.S. Constitution. Specifically, we're talking about the acts. Acts. Cool. Your possible essay. Not for this week, but just in life. You might have a possible essay. Write this one down. Assess the influence of the following on the U.S. Constitution. So, of course, the Enlightenment. Who did we talk about? Locke, Voltaire, Montesquieu. Colonial experience. What could we talk about? Oppressive acts and Articles of Confederation. What could we talk about? The weaknesses, right? Strengths and weaknesses. Good. So, would this be a pretty easy essay to write? I would say so. It's actually a fairly easy essay. If you had to answer which of these do you think was most influential, that's a very different question. So between these three, how many of you believe the Enlightenment was most influential on the U.S. Constitution? It was the most influential out of all three. How many of you think the colonial experience was the most influential of all three? And how many of you think it was the Articles of Confederation that was most influential? Good. Now, does that mean that the other two were not important? No. Now, if you were writing an essay on this, would you put your most influential up top as your first paragraph, or would you make it your last paragraph? I would prefer last paragraph only because you're saying this was okay and this was okay, but bam, have you read the Articles of Confederation? It is very influential. And do you always want to leave on a good note? Sure, because your thesis is your first impression already, right? And if you have a solid thesis, you should be fine. And if you end with your best paragraph, the reader will be like, oh, that was pretty good. And you end with a good paragraph. So yeah. So that, folks, is the end of Unit 2. We're done with that. So, what we are going to do right now is we are going to prepare your essay for Unit 2. Yeah, guys. This is your essay, but I'm going to pass out this worksheet to all of you. Okay, so your prompt for your essay next week, next Wednesday, the same day of your multiple choice test that you will be performing in class, and your essay will also be written in class, you will have an hour, is the French and Indian War 1754 to 1763 altered the relationship between Britain and its North American colonies. Assess this change with regard to two of the following in the period between 1763 and 1775. And you're going to talk about land acquisition, politics, and economics. Everyone good so far? All right. So, we're going to go ahead and first off figure out what the heck is this essay asking us to do. Yes, sir?
We need 2 more.
Need 2 more. All right. So, the way this would work, folks, is we're going to do what, how. So the first part of do what, how is verbs. So who can tell me a verb that they can see in this prompt? So who can tell me one verb? Jonathan. Oh, Mike. Huh?
Assess.
Assess. So assess is one verb, definitely. There's assess. We're going to write assess up here. And you can do this and follow along on yours. Is there another verb in this? And yes, there is. It's not a hypothetical question. What is the other verb in this? Steve? Altered. Altered. Okay? So we have 2 verbs. Assess and altered. Okay? Now, before we even move on, what does assess mean? Explain or discuss why or how. What does altered mean?
Change.
It means change, right? Okay. Now, let's move on to what. So, according to this, folks, what are we supposed to assess? So who can raise their hand and tell me what we are supposed to assess? Sadie. So change in relationship. Good. Change in relationship. Very good. What is supposed to be altered? Or what is being altered in this question? Who can raise their hand and tell me what is being altered in this question? What's being altered?
The relationship.
The relationship, yeah, the relationship. And let's move on to the how. So how are we supposed to assess the change in relationship? So who can raise their hand and tell me how we're supposed to be assessing this change in relationship. How is this essay asking us to do it? Lewis?
Explain the land acquisition.
Correct. So land acquisition, politics, and economics. So that's how we're supposed to assess change in relationship, through land acquisition, politics, and economics. With regard to that altering relationship, how was that relationship altered? The French and Indian War. So do you see how doing a do what how helps us analyze what's actually being asked of us? We're going to assess that change in relationship through land acquisition, politics, and economics, but specifically how that relationship changed because of the French and Indian War. Does that make sense to everyone so far? Okay. The next part we need to understand is timeline. Who can raise their hand and tell me what the timeline is that we're supposed to stick to? What is the expected timeline of this essay? Jerry. 1763 to 1775. Which means, can we talk about the Declaration of Independence? No. Are we talking about the Constitution or the Articles? No. It has to be before 1775. And it has to be after 1763. So what can't we talk about? We're not really supposed to be talking about the French and Indian War. Now, can we mention the French and Indian War? But is it about the French and Indian War? No, I need to make that very clear also. This is not an essay about what happened during the French and Indian War. It's about how the French-Indian War changed the relationship. Does that make sense to everyone? It's not about the French-Indian War. It's about that change in relationship and how it changed between 1763 and 1775. Does everyone get that part? Okay. So in order to ensure that you understand what is being asked of you, I'm going to give you 5 minutes to rephrase the question so it makes sense to you. So go ahead and spend about 5 minutes, talk to someone to clarify, but make sure you are rephrasing this question in your own words. So take 5 minutes to do that. If you have any questions, please let me know. But again, spend about 4.5 more minutes. Share with a partner once you're done to make sure you're on the right track. Yes.
Do we have like two? Because last time we picked all.
In this essay, you will be choosing only 2. So from this point on, you will do exactly what they ask of you. Huh? If you do 3, I'm not going to read the 3rd one. Yeah. So if you do 3, I'm not going to read the 3rd one. Does anyone else need more time working on their thesis? Okay. Let's read what you have, not thesis, your rephrasing real quick. Let's read what you guys have here to make sure everyone's on the right track so we can move forward. Josue, please read your rephrasing of this question.
That's the change in relationship between the Britain and American colonies
Yeah, go ahead.
between the period of 1763 and 1775.
So that's the change between the British and the American between 1763 and 1775. Good. Enrique, how would you rephrase this?
Because the French and Indian War changed the relationship between Britain and its North American colonies. What were the changes? What were the changes in the following?
And then those 3? Yeah, so because the relationship was changed, what were the changes? And then 1763 to 1775, and then those 3. Let's do one more. Jerry.
Explain the change in relationship between the North American colonies and Britain, including the land acquisition, politics, and economics, after the French and Indian War had caused a change in their relationship.
Okay, so explain the change in relationship between the North Americans and the British, especially considering land acquisition, politics, and economics, because of the French and Indian War. Good. So again, does everyone have a good idea of what this question is asking of you? Wonderful. So, next up on this list is a thesis, but we're not going to do the thesis just yet. What I want us to do as a class is to brainstorm what facts that can be used in this essay. So on the very bottom of this page here, you see there's a chart very similar to this that lists, that has a space where you can list down the facts that you can find for land acquisition, politics, and economics. Now before we move forward here, does anyone have any questions about these 3 categories? Does everyone know what politics is? Economics. Does anyone have a question about land acquisition? Okay, so you guys know what that means is how one got land, right? How we acquired land. Good. So I'm going to give you guys about 7 minutes. What I want you to do is to list down as many facts as you can think of going through your notes for these 3 categories, and then we'll share them out, and as a class, we're going to build a fact list that you can use for your essays next week. Make sense? Okay, so spend about 7 minutes, go through your notes with a partner, and again, pull out as many facts as you can. Seven minutes.
The colonies constant to like over. Wait, hold on. We need to see if these were within the timeline. Are these in the timeline, Jerry? How did it
You don't have to do that, you just do it. The treaty of Paris is 1 year because it led into negotiations.
Or these were all some acts, and they were all in 1763, so counts. Proclamation Act was in 1763, so you could have done that too. And then from then you could just do one. Wait, which one? Oh, that means that meant that American only trade with Britain. That's economics, yeah.
This one, the Proclamation Act. Why you?
There's navigation act in 1963. Well, what's the navigation act in 1763? But was this one? Well, was this one plus 1763?
It's all right.
This 1775.
Would that be like? Yeah, propaganda. So would you count that? What's currency act? Currency act. Wait, what? Do you think that would be more of an economic thing because it's more like we're not gonna buy your stuff, we're gonna make our own stuff. Oh, because then you said that was a positive, right? Or something positive, What was positive? That was the positive.
Politics is like democracy
How about the voice, the internet voice? Is that also translated? Yeah, that one is
All right, so let's go ahead and grab some people here and add to the list. Beatrice, what's one fact that I can add to my list here? Declaration of Rights and Grievances, where would you add that? So Declaration of Rights and Grievances, sure. What else? Jesus.
For economics, I put that most of the tax acts because they help the British pay their war debts.
So which ones?
Stamp act.
Stand back, sure. Trisha. Treaty of Paris? Nope, that's 1783. That's at the end of the. Remember, this goes up to the beginning of the war, so it can't be Treaty of Paris. So what else could you use? Proclamation Act. Where would you put Proclamation Act? So land. Can you also put Proclamation under politics? Can you also put it under economics? Yeah, think about the reasons why they did it, right? You can say Proclamation was about land, but did they also try to control the colonists? So Proclamation Act. Did they also want to prevent further wars? So economic. So you have those arguments. What else? Back to Jesus. So what other facts can you use?
Maybe like the coercive act.
Coercive acts. Where would you put the coercive acts?
And economics.
You could put it under economic. Where else could you put the coercive acts? Politics.
What's the course of accident?
Trisha, back to you. Writs of assistance. Where would you put that? Politics. Good. The writs of assistance. Roger.
I put the Vice Admiralty Court under politics.
Vice Admiralty Courts under politics. Louis Guandique. Where would you put the oppressive acts? Well, that's all of them, so be more specific. Name one act. Huh? The Townsend Act. Where would you put the Townsend Act? Economics, sure. Townsend Act. Under economics. Emma, what else? Where would you put the Sons of Liberty? Politics, sure. Sons of Liberty. Good fact. Steve, what else can we use? Boston Port Act. Where would you put that? Sure. Boston Port Act. Jackie? Massachusetts Government Act, sure. Josie. Where would you put that? You can make it economic. Could we also make the Boston Tea Party political? You can say it's like a political protest, right? So we can always do that. Martin. Sugar Act, yeah, where would you put that? Economics, sure, definitely. Jacob.
Boston Massacre.
Where would you put that?
Politics.
Boston Massacre under politics. Luis Guandique. Huh? Quartering Act. Where would you put the Quartering Act? Sure, you can make the argument that's an indirect tax. Could you also make Quartering Act political? Sure. What else? Just raise your hand, folks. What other facts can we include? Yeah. Quebec Act. Where would you put Quebec Act? Sure, Quebec Act is political. What other facts can we use? Yeah. Navigation Act. Where would we put that? Economic. What else can we use? Leilani. First Continental Congress. Where would you put that? Politics. So First Continental Congress, definitely. That was just meeting. Any others? Emma. The Continental Association. Where would you put that? Economics. So Continental. That's still 1775. Yeah, Jackie. Propaganda. Where would you put propaganda? Politics. Trisha? Oh, you're talking about that Treaty of Paris.
Yeah.
Sorry, there's a lot of them. Yes, you can include that Treaty of Paris. Where would you put that? Huh? Land acquisition. Okay, so that makes more sense. Sorry, in my mind, I think of that as the Peace of Paris, but you are correct. My apologies. 1763. Any other facts that we can think of that we could include in this essay? Yeah, Sebastian. Declaratory Act. Where would you put that? Politics. Declaratory Act. Any others that we can include in this essay? Yeah, Pedro? Currency Act. Where would you put that? Economics. Any others? Yeah, Louis? Huh? Martial law. You can put that under politics. Any others? Let's go through the list real quick. So we have proclamation, navigation, sugar, writs, vice, Stamp Act. Stamp Act Congress. Where would you put that? Huh? Where would you put the Stamp Act Congress? Politics, right? So Stamp Act Congress. What did the colonists do when they were upset at something? Boycott. So the Stamp Act, Currency Act, Declaratory Act, Townsend Act, Boston Massacre, Tea Act. Tea Act! Where do we put the Tea Act? Economic. Boston Tea Party, Coercive Acts, Quebec Act. Sure. All good facts. All good facts, folks. And there's two other facts we need to include here to explain why these colonists might be upset or why any of this is happening in the first place. So economically, why did the British do all of this?
Because the colonists were in debt because of the French and Indian War.
Debt. And why were the colonists upset that their rights were being taken away? What were they used to?
They were used to their democracy ways.
Yeah, salutary or benign neglect. So these are also good terms you should use. Do you have to use all these terms? No, you don't. You only have an hour to write, folks, so you don't have to use all of this. Should you use like 6 to 8 of them per paragraph? Yeah, I think you could. I mean, the goal is to have as many facts as possible. But again, remember, folks, do you have to explain briefly what these are? Yeah, so you can't just be like, oh yeah, so this happened, this happened, this happened. You have to explain. But do you guys feel comfortable having a good list of facts? Okay, the next part then is this. You can only choose 2 of these. Okay? So how many of you are going to use economics as one of your paragraphs? How many of you are going to use politics as one of your paragraphs? How many of you are going to use land acquisition as one of your paragraphs? Okay? You can, but I don't think it's your best option because there's not very much. So if you're comparing someone who can have, let's say, 10 facts in a paragraph versus you can have 3 or 4, but a lot of his explanation, I would suggest you guys lean towards politics and economics because you have a lot more to write about. You might be able to write a great land acquisition paragraph, but you would probably be able to write a better politics or economics paragraph. So I would lean towards politics and economics. But facts are great, but what do we still have yet to do? Assess and analyze. So turn to the back of the page. So something that we always have to remember to do is to, again, answer the question, right? So having a list of facts, does that alone answer the question? No, it does not. So we have to make sure that it shows change in the relationship. So let's say this first paragraph is going to be, hold on, let me change this. Okay, which paragraph should we tackle first? Politics or economics? Economics, sure. Oops. So our first paragraph will be an economic paragraph. On the day of the test, I really could care less which one you choose first. But someone give me a fact that we can use to discuss economics. Give me one fact that we can talk about change with. Navigation acts. Okay, so how did it change the relationship, folks? What changed from before and after? Roger.
Before the Navigation Act, the colonists could trade with anyone they want, but after it, they could only trade with Britain.
Good. So before, you went from free trade to what? Maybe restricted trade and mercantilism. And did the colonists like that?
No.
No, so colonists were sad. But again, does that show change? And what I want you guys to do is to go over each fact that you want to use and explain what the change was. Does that make sense to everyone? Because that's ultimately what you're being asked to do. It's not to explain the fact or to tell me what the fact is, though your explanation may do that. It's to show me how that fact changed things. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay. Hold on, how are we doing here? So, you guys have 6 minutes remaining in class today. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to use the rest of class to continue explaining your facts, or you can start working on a thesis. Now, again, is there an argument? Actually, let's do a thesis right now. Is there an argument in this essay already given to you?
Yeah.
Sort of, right? Is that it altered the relationship. But your job is to assess how that relationship was altered. So what are possible theses you could have when discussing a change? What argument can you make when discussing a change in relationship and talking about two of the following: land acquisition, politics, and economics? So could you argue that there was a lot of change?
Yeah.
Could you argue that there was a little bit of change?
Yeah.
Could you argue that one changed the relationship more than the other?
Yeah.
Yes, so you need to take a stand and write a thesis that shows or assesses change. Pretty much, what is your argument about that change in relationship? That it was a good change or a bad change? It was a lot of change or a little change? It was more change for one, but not for the other. Does that make sense, folks? So spend the last 5-6 minutes coming up with the thesis.